Flame City by L. Ron Hubbard. The shrieks and moans of sirens greeted Tom Delaney as he swung into the corridor which led to his father's office. He paused for a moment to listen, feeling somewhat ill at ease and out of place. To a detective sergeant, fires were the business of another world, but his father, old Blaze Delaney, chief of the fire eaters, had called him, and Tom Delaney had responded, wondering just how a detective could hope to extricate a fireman from an intricate web of circumstances. Before Detective Sergeant Tom Delaney could knock, his father swooped out of his office, drawing on slicker and helmet as he ran. Blaze Delaney's fire-reddened face was set and hard, and his smoke-stung eyes caught and held the image of his son.
"Another one!"
he shouted, his mustache bristling.
"Come on!"
The detective swung into line, hard put to keep up with the racing old man. When Blaze Delaney swung into the red car without pausing and sent it hurtling away from the curb, his son was forced to catch a precarious hold on the side, swinging from there into the seat.
What's up?
"What's up be hanged. There's plenty up. If you didn't keep your big ears so close to the woes of the petty thieves, you'd know the old man was about to be thrown out."
Blaze Delaney thrown out? The detective blinked and tried to imagine such a circumstance. As long as he could remember, his father had been lord of the city's fires. His father was an immovable institution, a character of great repute. Tom Delaney watched the old fire eater's anger vent itself against the traffic. He always drove his own cars, did Blaze, for the good reason that he could drive faster than anyone on the department's rolls.
I've noticed that we've been having more fires than usual, but
More fires than usual? Young fella, we've had 250% more fires in the past 2 months than in any other corresponding period. If you don't know that, you don't even read the newspapers. Right now, the Tyler department store is burning, and it's a concrete building that can't burn.
He went around a corner on something less than 2 wheels, missed a pair of streetcars, and gave a taxi driver the scare of his life. The automatic siren was wailing, almost drowning conversation in the coupe.
but why should you be kicked out just because?
Well, that's why I sent for you. You're supposed to be good at riddles.
You mean you think this is arson on a big scale?
Blaze Delaney grunted loudly.
I don't think it. I know it.
Tom's dark eyebrows went up and his shoulders moved in the slightest kind of a shrug.
I thought you had a special department which investigated such things.
That's what you think.
Well, I'm telling you this, Dad. I don't know anything about fires and what starts them. But if you're in trouble and you think I can be of help, here I am.
Well, good. That's what I wanted you to say. If this thing doesn't stop, I'm out of a job and my reputation is wrecked. Well, there's the fire.
Blaze Delaney rocketed up to the lines and jumped out.
Confound that number 3. No, I told them to wait for me before they started sitting in.
And then a swelling wall of smoke swallowed both the chief and his words, and the detective sergeant was left with his riddle. Tyler's department store was a welter of shooting smoke and snapping flames. The entire first floor was filled with lightning-like tongues against which the thin streams of water seemed fragile and aimless. Tom Delaney sat still and watched the toiling firemen at their seemingly hopeless task. Dusk was falling and lending color to the blaze. The flames began to recede slowly and sullenly under the onslaught of water and chemicals. The detective looked up to see a tall, incredibly thin man approaching the red coupe.
Where's the old man?
Asked the newcomer. The detective shrugged.
In there eating smoke like he always is.
You're his son, right? I'm Blackford, head of the investigation department.
Tom Delaney shook the limp hand with a feeling of distaste.
3 girls must have, sizzled. I can't account for them. It's too bad.
Looks like arson, doesn't it?
Don't know. I never can tell until I get inside. There was a garage under the first floor, and I think we'll find it started from oily waste. It usually does. Some mechanic gets careless with a cigarette butt, and zowie, there you are.
When do you investigate?
As soon as it cools down. They'll be in about another hour. Why, you figuring on sticking around?
Do you mind if I do?
Oh, no. Glad to have you. Then you can okay my report.
He started away into the crowd, his eyes whipping about as though still searching for the fire chief. Almost an hour later, Blaze Delaney came back to his car. He was black with soot and smoke and dripping from innumerable encounters with lashing streams of water. He had an odor about him like that of wet ashes.
Ah, hell. There's another one across town. Residents.
Tom whistled.
I'll stay here and go over the burnt ruins with Blackford.
You know him? That's good. Fine fella, Blackford. He'll show you the ropes if you want to learn. Go on, pile out. I'm in a hurry.
Tom Delaney piled out and stood on the soaked asphalt watching the red coupe go screaming out of sight. Engines and hose carts were pulling out in its wake, carrying their cargoes of red-eyed, dripping men who swore wearily as they realized that the night's work promised no respite. Blackford was standing just outside the gutted door of the department store, playing a flashlight over the black interior. He turned the beam on the detective.
Hello! I was hoping you'd be along. It looks safe enough inside, but don't move anything. That second floor looks like it's sagging in spots.
Lazy spirals of steam were rising up from the ravaged counters to hang in the air like a choking poisonous gas. Goods were heaped in sullen, charred piles which dripped gray water. Two men in raincoats stood dismally beside the wall looking at the chaos.
Hello, Blackford. Hope you get this thing figured out in a hurry. There's $100,000 in goods, insurance alone.
Yeah? You would be worried about your blamed insurance? What about my company that's paying all this? If we find out it's arson, it's going to go hard with somebody. Look alive, Blackford.
Slowly, he trudged out of the shambles into the flickering glitter of the streetlights.
That first one was Tyler himself. The other guy was Morley of Grayson's insurance company. Those insurance guys always give me a pain. They act like I caused all these burns. Let's go down in the basement and look around in what's left of the garage.
Tom Delaney coughed as smoke stung his throat.
I thought it looked as though it started on the main floor. How could the flame get through this concrete?
Elevator shafts. It always looks as though it started on the main floor. That's because fire burns upward.
Sounds reasonable, but I think I'll look around up here.
Go ahead,
Said Blackford amiably, and followed the detective over to the front wall. Tom Delaney broke out his own flashlight and stabbed it through the foggy interior, probing into piles of goods along the floor. He went slowly ahead, marveling that anyone could ever trace arson in such a hideous shambles. Then he stopped with something like a shudder and played the light on a charred hand which jutted out from beneath a counter. He bent down and then straightened up.
I'll send in the morgue wagon when we go outside. That's one of your missing girls, Blackford.
Blackford looked quickly away.
I found the other two.
Uh-huh. Both dead, weren't they? This isn't only arson, it's first-degree murder. That is, if the fire was more than an accident. Funny they couldn't have seen the flames coming at them.
Yeah. Panic. People get trampled.
Sure. But it was almost closing time when this fire started, and there couldn't have been many in the building. I think we'll find it started on this floor, and in more than one place.
It takes a detective to figure all that out. I wouldn't have thought about it, I guess.
Tom Delaney said nothing more. He walked ahead, still lashing the counters with his light. This must have been the dress goods department, he judged. Then once more he stopped and stood looking down. Blackford came up and peered over the detective's shoulder.
Bottle glass. Now what the devil could bottle glass be doing here?
Blackford shrugged and picked a fragment up, sniffing at it.
Furniture polish. They used it to polish the counters, I guess.
But the detective took the fire-dulled splinter from the investigator and shoved it into his pocket.
Maybe so, but I'll analyze this for explosive or acid. Nothing like being thorough.
He began to search the floor over a radius of 15 feet. Painstakingly, he went over the charred and littered surface, moving unrecognizable objects, examining others. And then he found a piece of copper wire. Slowly, he traced it down and uncovered another thread of metal.
Does insulation burn off extension cords?
Sometimes.
But if these things had insulation on them, there'd be charred pieces and...
He reached down and scooped up a bit of straw.
Excelsior.
Blackford smiled tolerantly.
They pack a lot of things in Excelsior in department stores. Come on, I've got to get busy. We have a certain routine that usually gives us the answer, and I'll have to have a report in another hour. I'm going outside and get another battery for my light. This thing is getting pretty dim.
I'll go with you.
They worked through the choking fog to the door, skirting the ruins in the aisles and carefully avoiding the spot where the dead girl lay. When they stepped into the open air, Delaney took a long, deep, grateful breath.
I'll get the morgue squad and then go up to headquarters and analyze this glass.
Idly, he watched a black sedan drop to the curb not 10 feet away.
Okay, if you find anything...
A pistol shot, as vicious as it was unexpected, gouged the concrete near Delaney's feet. A harsh, strident voice bellowed.
Up with the mitts, you guys! We'll let you have it.
Delaney started to reach for his own gun and then realized that he was checkmated. Slowly, he elevated his hands and watched two men walk toward him through the thin stream of light from the street lamp.
Connolly and Soapy Jackson.
Know us, do ya? Seen us in the lineup? That's it. Turn around, both of you.
Delaney turned because he knew that this pair always meant what they said. He saw Soapy Jackson bring a blackjack down on Blackford's head, and then something crashed against his own skull. He stumbled bitterly forward into unconsciousness. They could not have gone far, for the car was stopped when Detective Sergeant Tom Delaney regained his battered senses. He sat up and found that a pistol muzzle was prodding him in the side.
Get along, little cop,
Said Soapy Jackson.
Walk up those steps and don't look back. We'll be right behind you.
Staggering slightly, Delaney climbed down from the car, discovering that his hands were tied behind his back. His top coat was dusty and his hat had been lost, allowing his dark hair to cascade down over his face. He shook it out of his eyes and went up the steps, feeling helpless and weak.
You don't like to be sacked, eh? Serves you right, Flatfoot.
Soapy Jackson kicked open a door, and for the first time, Delaney took account of his surroundings. This house was neither old nor shabby. It was bounded by a beautiful landscaped yard which showed care even in the dim light of evening. The knocker on the door was brightly polished. But evidently there were no occupants, for Jackson stamped through the halls as though he owned the entire building. Standing beside the door he had thrown open, Connolly pointed into a dark closet.
This is good enough. Throw him in.
Delaney was knocked off balance by a shove against his shoulder. Head first, unable to catch himself, he pitched into the cramped interior. Jackson kicked his legs out of the doorway.
Listen, Flatfoot. Just for your peace of mind, listen for the doorbell. When it rings, that'll be the signal for you to start practicing on your hop.
If they give dead cop harps.
Added Jackson, chuckling.
But even if you do get one, you're going to get a little taste of hell first.
He shoved a dirty handkerchief into Delaney's mouth and tied it there with another. That done, he slammed and locked the door, leaving the detective in darkness blacker than ink. For the next 5 minutes, Delaney lay still, listening and marshaling his swimming senses. He heard the two mobsters pounding around the first floor and heard their muffled voices calling to each other across the length of the empty house. Evidently, they were not worried about interference. And then the front door slammed and the building was as silent as it was dark. Delaney tried vainly to put the jigsaw puzzle together. He knew that detectives were often rubbed out for no apparent reason other than vengeance. But he did not understand just why he had been picked up at Tyler's department store. 2, Connolly had said something about the doorbell, meaning apparently that other persons would enter and finish the work the mobsters had begun. If he could only get out, Delaney knew exactly where to find Soapy Jackson and Connolly. Like most gangsters, they had a common stomping ground where they could establish plenty of alibis. Even if anyone had seen them strike the detective and Blackford down, the assailants could prove that they were not involved in the killing of the detective, for the coroner would be unable to establish exactly the length of time Delaney had been dead. The worst that could happen to Connolly and Jackson would be accessory to the fact, a charge easily shed with the aid of a smart lawyer. For a few moments, Delaney wondered what had happened to Blackford, and then decided that the investigator had not been wanted. The mobsters were looking for revenge, that was all. Perhaps one of their friends had been sent up through Delaney's efforts. Delaney tried to remember and then gave it up. He was feeling considerably better physically and considerably worse mentally when he discovered that his feet were not tied. He moved them restlessly and kicked at the door without result. And then he remembered that Blaze Delaney, the fire eater, was slated for the retirement list and disgrace. And the fact did something to him. It would break the old man's heart to be ousted just because he didn't have enough equipment to fight the flames which were gradually reducing the city to charred embers. And just that would happen if the present rate of fires kept up. Tom Delaney must do something. He reared back on his knees, bracing his shoulder against the wall. Slowly and carefully, he worked himself up to his feet and stood tottering. Experimentally, he slammed his shoulder against the door and found that the unnatural position of his hands made the impact extremely painful against his shoulder. Nevertheless, he heaved himself against the door once more. Just as he braced himself for a third try against the stubborn wood, he heard the doorbell ring. The sound of its jangling made a shiver course its way down his spine. It seemed to have a significance other than the arrival of more gangsters. Close on the heels of the bell came a sudden sullen throb, not unlike the heavy jar of a falling wall. Delaney stiffened, waiting for the sound of footsteps, but none came. The house was tomb-like in its silence. But not for long. A thin, reedy crackle whispered through the keyhole of the locked closet door and grew steadily in volume. Suddenly, Delaney's nostrils quivered with a harsh odor of smoke. The house was burning. Something like panic welled up in Delaney's chest. He had faced guns and fists and unknown deaths, but the knowledge that he was about to be burned alive made all other dangers seem small. He set his teeth and hurled himself against the heavy door, a hiss escaping his teeth as the impact sent hot agony down his arm. He turned his other side to the panels and crashed with renewed force. Above the growing roar of flames, he thought he heard the wood splinter. Summoning all the strength in his body, the detective sent himself forward like a hurtling projectile. The door shivered away from its mooring and crashed forward, Delaney toppling on its surface. All air had been hammered out of him, but he checked himself from taking a deep breath. Smoke hung about his face, though he was in its thinnest state, the floor. For an instant, he marveled at the rapidity with which the fire had spread. He struggled upward until his face was 3 feet from the floor. There, he knew he would find the cleanest air and an absence of the heavy poisonous gases which mushroomed against the planks under his knees. He was breathing from the top, for he knew that unconsciousness would come if he dragged deeply at the hot, acrid air. Moving forward on his knees, he fought his way to the front door. He tried to stand up to turn the knob, but it was locked from the outside. For an instant, he pressed his face to a crack and breathed clean air. The gag and the smoke were doing their best to choke him. From there, he struggled along the wall toward another door, which loomed dimly through the gray mist. The heat was shriveling, but Delaney went on, tripping, trying to see out of smarting eyes. At last he was through the portal, but the fire was licking through the wall at the other end of the room. He felt his eyebrows and hair grow crisp and singed. He swore into the gag and tried to find a window. At last, a cool pane of glass touched his face, and he drew back thankfully. With great difficulty, he climbed up on the sill and kicked savagely. Glass showered to the floor, and the outrushing blast of heated air took Delaney with it. Without knowing just how he came to be there, he sat up on the lawn and looked at the burning structure, which now was sending showers of sparks and geysers of flames into the black night. Smoke rolled starward and mushroomed down like some evil bird of prey. Delaney got to his feet and walked as rapidly as possible toward the sidewalk, watching the gathering crowd for a bluecoat. Someone opened the gate for him, and then a policeman materialized with an amazed gasp.
Delaney, what the devil are you?
And then he saw the gag and quickly removed it. From his pocket, he whipped a knife with which he cut the rope that held the detective's hands.
Thanks, Turl.
Said Delaney, moving his sore mouth as little as possible.
Did you turn in an alarm?
Sure I did, but I haven't seen nothing of the outfit yet.
Probably busy at 2 or 3 other fires. Where's your patrol car?
Terrell pointed to the machine and elbowed away for the detective. People jamming the sidewalk shook their heads and murmured sullenly about the laxity of the fire department. Delaney gave no sign that he heard, his mind too busy with the project at hand. He slid under the wheel.
I'll send this back from headquarters. Stand by for the fire engines.
He pulled the whistle cord wide open and went hurtling away through the traffic. Blaze Delaney was not the only one who prided himself on being able to put a car through the streets in a hurry. He had passed the ability on to his son. Within 5 minutes, the detective braked in front of headquarters and leaped out, sprinting up the 3 stairs to the squad room. His inspector gasped across his desk through the open door.
Delaney, what on earth have you been into? You look like a cinder.
I feel like one. I lost my gun. Got one handy?
You're in the devil of a hurry.
He fished a revolver out of a cutlery drawer and pushed it across into Delaney's hands.
You better clean up before you go out. That's a hell of a way to go off duty.
I'm not going off duty.
Delaney shot over his shoulder.
And I'll look worse in no time at all.
He leaned over the railing and barked at the desk sergeant.
Where can I find my dad?
Don't know. There's 3 unattended fires waiting for him right now. And I don't know which he'll hit first, but I ain't supposed to know.
Delaney soared down the flights of steps, pausing only long enough to detail a man to return Terrell's car. He found his own machine at the curb and climbed aboard. The exhaust whistle chortled insanely, and the car swerved headlong into a cluster of taxis which parted like frightened chickens. But the detective cut down his speed and shut off the racket 2 blocks away from his destination. As softly and silently as a ghost, he drifted into a parking place opposite a pool hall he knew very well. He sat for an instant, getting his breath before he climbed down, looking up at the red glows which spotted the sky. At no time in its history had the city seen so many fires burning at the same time. The newspapers had exhausted themselves sending out extras. Delaney saw a paper now in the hand of a howling boy. He received a glimpse of the headlines. Mayor to oust Delaney. Negligence. So they were going to put the skids under his dad after all, in spite of anything Blaze Delaney could do. Right now, the chief of fire eaters was out fighting the battle of his life against flame, and up in the city hall, or more likely in a comfortable sitting room this time of night, the mayor was denouncing and forgetting that he had cut down the fire department himself in the name of economy. But the detective had too many things on his mind to worry long about mere mayors. He got out of his car and walked slowly and purposefully in the direction of the lighted entrance. From within came the sounds of clicking balls and arguing men. An electric piano poured out its strident heart in an attempt to drown conversation. An electric sign advertised Joe's Social Hall, beer, snooker, pool. Delaney pushed back both swinging doors at once and stepped through into the yellow lights. The bartender glanced up from a dice game, surprise making his face flabby.
What's the matter, Delaney?
Croaked the loose throat. But the detective was not there to waste talk. He stalked along the length of the bottle-flanked mirrors until he saw his quarry. Soapy Jackson and Connolly were leaning over cues. They were without their coats, and the caliber of the place was clearly emphasized by the fact that both mobsters exhibited shoulder holsters in plain sight. Connolly's chin went in with a jerk, and he blinked his black, beady eyes. He touched Jackson's shoulder.
Pipe the dick.
Even as though motivated by slow motion mechanism, Jackson turned. But Jackson's nerves were not as good as Connolly's. His hand started to shake and he dropped his cue with a startled,
Gosh, Delaney!
The detective's hand was suddenly shadowed by a revolver.
I want you two birds. Get your coats.
But the two gangsters were not without friends. Before they could move, a pistol butt and face jutted up over Delaney's shoulder, and the butt started down. Jackson's eyes narrowed instinctively, and the detective understood with a practice born of 1,000 such situations. He dived sideways, and his gun roared. The puffy-faced wielder of the weapon swore luridly and grabbed at his blood-spurting wrist. Connolly's hand shot to his shoulder holster and came out spitting. His gun belched flame a second time before Delaney's bullet sent him thudding back against the wall. Jackson stood shaking, glancing to left and right, looking for an out. And then Delaney's singed, calm face came up through a ring of powder smoke.
I usually mean what I say. Walk right ahead of me quick. And never mind those coats. You won't need them where you're going.
Jackson and Connolly walked stiffly, the latter holding his shoulder and moaning. The bartender tried to catch Delaney's attention and apologize, but the detective walked out through the doors unheeding. At the car, the detective removed an oddly limp blackjack from Jackson, pulled 2 pairs of handcuffs out of the side pocket, and snapped them on docilely offered wrists.
Listen, can't we talk business on this thing?
No, get in.
The two slumped into the seat, looking helplessly about, shivering slightly as the night breeze cut through their shirt sleeves. While Delaney was starting the car, Jackson spoke again.
Listen, I got 10 grand in a safe deposit box.
Shut up! You'll get us for bribery. Ain't you got any sense?
Delaney drove the car for several blocks before the two noticed that they weren't heading for the police station.
Listen, I gotta get this shoulder fixed. I'll bleed to death.
Go ahead. It'll save the state the price of electricity.
Have a heart, copper. We didn't mean no harm.
Connolly stopped long enough to emit a heart-rending moan.
I'm gonna take you birds with me. I've got a little research to do, and after that we'll go back to the station house and try a rubber hose on you. I've got an idea that it'll work.
Jackson grunted dolefully.
Hey, you don't have to do that, Copper. We'll spill right now if you want us to.
Go ahead.
If we turn state's evidence, will you let us off?
Demanded Connolly, miraculously reviving.
I'm not promising you birds anything. I don't have to have your dope. I've got just all I need right now. The big boy talked plenty fast.
You mean?
Shut up! He's baiting us.
Jackson's mouth took on a trap-like aspect. Jammed as he was between the wounded Connolly and the unmoved Delaney, he cautiously tried to find out how close he could come to wrecking the car. But Delaney's hands were steel clamps on the spokes.
Scared, aren't you? All I can say is you'll be a whole lot more scared in a couple hours.
Ahead, the gutted ruins of Tyler's department store loomed. Several bluecoats were posted there now, keeping out any possible looters who might try to get away with charred valuables. Smoke still hung about the structure like a dreary cloak. The detective drew up to the curb and called to an officer to keep an eye on the two occupants of the roadster. Borrowing a flashlight, he went into the building and stayed for several minutes. Presently, he came out and climbed in under the wheel.
Need any help?
No thanks. You got any idea where I can find Blaze Delaney?
Well, he's all over the city tonight. I heard there were 16 fires going at the same time. I can call the fire department for you.
Go ahead.
In a few seconds, the policeman was back.
He's working at 16th and Bushman, according to the latest. It was 17 fires instead of 16. I hear they're going to throw old man Delaney out on his ear. That right?
The detective shook his head.
Just a rumor. My dad's in there to stay.
Glad to hear it.
The policeman smiled after the accelerating machine. The passage between Tyler's and 16th and Bushman Streets was made in record time, with the squad car chortling like a mad banshee. Ahead, the sky was growing redder and smokier until Delaney could smell the fire itself. It was not hard to smell smoke on this night. Spots in the overcast heavens hung like red ulcers above the town. At the edge of the fire lines, Delaney spotted the red coupe and drove in as close as he could. 2 policemen were vainly striving to keep the street clear for the smoke eaters.
Dobson, look after these 2 mugs, will you? I got some business. Where's Blaze Delaney?
Dobson gestured with his thumb and leaned against the running board, thankful for a chance to rest. The detective was not long in spotting the chief of the fire department. Blaze Delaney stood with his feet wide apart, bullying tired firemen to greater effort and directing the hard campaign against this particular 2-story structure. He saw his son, and his reddened eyes asked a vital question.
Not yet. Keep right on. You're pretty close to fighting your last fire tonight.
He smiled and cast about, attempting to recognize another individual. Finally, he spotted Blackford and went up to him. The investigator was standing on the outskirts of the fighters, looking on, a little bored. When he saw the detective, he blinked, and his thin face twitched.
Hello. Glad to see you got out of it all right.
He pointed to a bandage around his forehead.
They didn't take me with them.
No, I don't guess they did. I found this on Jackson.
He extracted a limp black thing from his pocket and patted it against the palm of his hand.
Huh. I've seen plenty of blackjacks.
Not like this, you haven't.
Delaney held it up.
It's stuffed with cotton batting.
Well, that's funny.
Funny as a morgue. You haven't got so much as a bump on your head. When Soapy Jackson sapped you with a cotton blackjack, you fell down and played possum to make it look good. Furthermore, your pals have been babbling their heads off.
Blackford's face was frozen in stunned surprise. All his nonchalance slid away from him like an avalanche. In the jumpy firelight, his skin was ashen.
They talked? You mean,
Delaney smiled twistedly and knew he had scored.
Look out there at that squad car.
The investigator looked, and if he had been disconcerted before, he was wild with terror now. His eyes went wider and his jaw slacked, showing unclean teeth. Something like a strangled sob came up in his throat. And then it was as though his entire nervous system had snapped. He was hemmed in on all sides save one. Policemen and firemen stood to either side and in back of him. The only cleared ground lay between the lines on the fire. Blackford choked again, his eyes holding an insane light. And then, before the weary Delaney could understand what had happened, he saw with a violent shock that Blackford had started to sprint straight toward the flames. Whether it was an attempt at suicide or a crazed blindness, Delaney did not stop to reason. Like a catapulted projectile, he was off in pursuit. The fire was beating hotly against the detective's face, but he plowed ahead. Behind him, Blaze Delaney was running and shouting. A fireman tried to catch the detective's billowing topcoat, but Blackford was already disappearing through the smoke-filled doorway of the crackling structure. Delaney saw it with a sinking heart, knowing that Blackford was determined not to be taken alive. But the detective's case was not closed. There were many loose ends he could never hope to patch without Blackford's confession. He plunged into the welter of gray geysering smoke, forgetful in his zeal that he himself might be engulfed and killed. Inside, there was neither visibility nor air. The instant the lighted patch, which was the door behind him, disappeared, Delaney knew that he was lost in appallingly close confines. He was immediately deserted by his sense of direction, for in stumbling through the building haze, he could not walk in a straight line. He collided with harshly solid objects, tripping, lunging forward, groping for a wall, trying to keep his face 3 feet above the floor in the air strata. And then he fell over a soft object which lay inert. It was Blackford. The last thing Delaney remembered was pulling Blackford away and trying to locate the entrance. The smoke tore at his lungs and the gray fog went black. He fell unconscious across the investigator. And then the detective was trying to sit up and someone was gently holding him back. He tried several times before he experimentally opened his eyes. He sighed with relief, for he was looking into the face of a worried Blaze Delaney.
Now lay still, blast it. You had me worried for a while. And if you don't stay still, you'll have me worried again.
You pulled me out?
Sure. It wasn't any trick with the gas mask. What was the idea of chasing Blackford into that place? And why the devil was Blackford trying to commit suicide?
Blackford's the firebug.
Go on. You're smoke tippy.
I'm not. How long has Blackford been in your department?
Well, let's see. About a year. He came here from the Chicago department with some fine letters of recommendation.
And then Delaney the Younger lurched to his feet and kicked the stretcher away from him. There was no holding him down, even though the old fire eater tried hard. Blackford was lying in a wire basket beside an ambulance, and the smoke-grimed attendant beside him was administering oxygen. The detective gave vent to a hacking cough, which was immediately stilled when he saw Blackford's eyes spring open.
Hello, alias Blackford,
said Delaney, kneeling down on the pavement beside the man. The investigator shut his eyes tightly and groaned.
Snap out of it. You're going to do some talking right here and now. What did you do with the original Blackford?
I'm him.
Whined the investigator with a beseeching look at the chief of fire eaters. Tom Delaney looked up with a slow wink, as though to inform Blaze Delaney that this game was being played in the dark.
Yeah? I happen to know you murdered him and took his papers before he had a chance to contact the department here. And you might as well not try to deny it.
He snatched the dirty coat front and lifted alias Blackford up, shaking him.
Talk or I'll pound you into hamburger.
Fear widened the investigator's eyes as he saw the hard-set jaw. His mouth twitched and he tried to swallow. Delaney shook him again and raised a knotted fist.
That's right!
That's better. Who paid you to make these phony reports and overlook fires that have been set?
Nobody. We got hold of owners that needed the insurance money and split it with them.
I thought so. And your favorite trick was taking a bottle of nitroglycerin, wrapping it in Excelsior, and putting electrical wires over the mouth. That right?
When the other had nodded weakly, the detective went on.
And you hooked the electrical wires to doorbells so that the fire never started until your pair of henchmen were miles away with a good alibi. You started the Tyler department store fire by connecting several soup bottles to the light switch, which you knew would be turned on just before closing.
Dismally, alias Blackford nodded assent. His was the expression of a thoroughly whipped dog.
Well, you'll face murder on a dozen different counts and arson. You and your pals out there in the squad car will certainly get mighty burnt. Did you set any more fires for tonight?
No. Don't I get anything off for turning state's evidence?
You didn't have to talk, but I have a dozen witnesses that you did. It'll take more than a smart mouthpiece to clear you of this rap. And furthermore, you're going to turn over a list of every man who allowed you to work on his property. Understand?
Alias Blackford understood. He lay like a sack of soggy straw and nodded only with an effort. Dully, he watched the two Delaneys move away.
But how did you ever get next to all this? You're leaving a lot of it out. I've done some detective in my time, but I never grabbed clues out of thin air that way.
Thin air? No thin air about that. I had to take some awful beatings to get that dope. Don't I look like it?
You sure do. But what happened to you?
They caught me at the Tyler store when I came out with Blackford. Smashed me on the head with a sap, carried me off, and set a fire under me. They thought I knew a lot more than I did. Blackford thought I was wise when he first laid eyes on me. He tipped off his boys to be on the alert, and then when I found some bottle glass inside...
Bottle glass?
Sure. I was going to take it up to the laboratory for analysis, just on a hunch. And Blackford knew that I'd find a trace of nitroglycerin on that fragment. And when I did, I'd be sure the fire was of incendiary origin. He was scared, and when we came out, he signaled his boys to jump me. They tied me up in a closet and wired a bottle of soup to the doorbell. Then, they went out and established an alibi and sent a messenger boy back to the house to ring the bell. He rang it in Blowy. The place was on fire.
Nitroglycerin set off by electricity. Huh. What the devil will pyromaniacs think of next? You were mighty lucky to get out, son. Looks like those fellows meant business.
I'll say they did. They weren't going to have their game cleared if they could help it. You see, Blackford made that snatch look good by having himself knocked out, supposedly. I found a cotton blackjack on one of his boys. If it hadn't been for that blackjack, then that piece of glass, we'd still be fighting fires all over town.
And thanks to you, we aren't,
said old Delaney, with more than a hint of pride. He pulled at his mustache and then looked up to see an acquaintance coming toward him.
Hello, Morley.
Morley, of Grayson's Insurance, came up beside them.
Ah, so you're the fair-haired lad that cleared up this mess. Is it against your code to accept rewards?
Well, we don't usually. Wait a minute. You need some new carts and hose, don't you, Dad?
Gosh, yes. Yes, well, they got me cut to the bone.
Fine. Hear that? Tell your company to make out the reward as a donation to the fire department. They shouldn't be very slow in doing that.
I'll say not. You saved us something like $1 million in claims, mainly more. I don't think Grayson's will forget it very fast. In fact, we'd like to get you appointed in Blackford's place. We've got the influence, you know.
Huh. That isn't such a bad idea. Better pay and shorter hours. What about it, son?
Not bad. Maybe I could keep you out of hot water. An hour ago, extras were on the streets saying that you were going to be kicked out. Hurts the family prestige, things like that. I guess I'd better take the job.
The detective grinned.
Yeah, I always said I'd make a fireman out of you,
Growled Blaze Delaney, and then fell to tugging fiercely at his mustache to hide the pleasure in his smoke-stung eyes.